Welcome back, pro wrestling fans. Welcome back, IWC. It's your old buddy, the Guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy, and I tell it like it is. I'll say that to say this. Come to you live to tape 25 feet below the surface of the earth, here for another special edition of Story Time on Chaos Corner on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. Fans, you're not going to want to miss this one. This is an incredible story time with the G.O.C. about the original Sheik and the book written by unbelievable author, historian, researcher, and one Brian Solomon. You know Brian Solomon from Shut Up and Wrestle, Arcadian Vanguard, the Jim Cornette Experience, the Drive-Thru, along with Brian Last and Jim Cornette. Brian Solomon, who's certainly one of the best right now in the business, also reports for PWI and is penning his next book on Gorilla Monsoon. So sit back and relax, hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, inbox me. You're not going to want to miss this one. We might do it in 2 parts. We'll see what happens as far as we go. Follow me on all social media platforms. You know what they are. On Twitter, aka X, Instagram, Facebook, Gitter, Gab, Truth Social, Rumble, and of course here on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. We're going to jump right into it. One man, unique, unedited, unscripted, raw dog for you, the fans. My over 50 years in this business as a historian, a researcher, a scout, an agent, a producer, a fan, a mark, that's right, I said it, a fucking mark. And my over 3 decades in this business as a talent, a pro wrestling manager, who took the fucking bumps a la Bobby Heenan, Jim Cornette, Jimmy Hart, J.J. Dillon, Captain Lou Albano, Freddie Blassie, the best of the best. And I put myself, although an indie, in pro wrestling in that caliber. That's right, I could say it, and I said it. Meet me back here on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. All right, fans, now that I got my little rambunctiousness out of the way, thank you guys for being here. Much love and respect to everyone that's here, subscribers and non-subscribers alike. We're less than 20, I believe, away from 1,000 subscribers, 500,000 views, and over 2,500 videos. Where else do you get something like this? Live to tape. This isn't a podcast. This is an episodic YouTube channel. TV show, if you will. So again, much love and respect. Shout out to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, because he's coming back soon. Don't be caught dead without him. And if he's for us, no one else can be against us. We need to, in this day and age, in 2024, to be mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually fit. It's insane out there right now. Wars all over the world. Invasion at the border, politics, finances, racial division, civil war. Who knows what's going to happen? I just want to throw out my 2 cents worth there to be aware. Tomorrow is not guaranteed for any of us, and that's a shoot. So we'll see if we're going to do this in 2 parts or not. It might be part 1 and a part 2. The original Sheik, Ed Farhat. Nihon no Shiku. Konnichiwa, bitches. Origato from Chaos-san. If you're a legend in Japan, you stay a legend. And he was. Let's jump right into it. On Story Time with the G.O.C. Although developed in the United States, the popularity of professional wrestling was far from confined to the U.S. or even in North America. In fact, during the second half of the 20th century, a case could convincingly be made its American popularity was not only rivaled, but exceeded by the cultural cachet it attained in Japan. Yes, I do have the Hall's Mentholyptus, sugar-free, honey lemon. It's still cold outside, but as you can hear by the nature sounds, it's warm and toasty in here. So bear with me. Ironically, the rise of professional wrestling in Japan coincided with the end of the existential military struggle between the two nations and, in a way, was directly linked to it. Just as the Second World War had changed the lives of young men like Edward Farhat, who were suddenly thrust into a foreign land with rifles in their hands, so too did it change the cultural landscape of those foreign lands. How apropos, seeing that we're in wars right now, and rumors of wars, and everything else that's going on, in biblical proportions. And with those changes came opportunities, some of which would arrive much later, as they did over a quarter of a century after the end of the war, when Farhat, now draped in the garb of the vicious Sheik, would find a whole new avenue for success in the land of the rising sun, as many of his North American colleagues were also doing. If the Sheik was a superstar in the United States and Canada, then the status he would attain in Japan must be described even more superlative terms. It was there that he became an icon, an almost supernatural force, an evil god of destruction about whom fans had heard whispered tales from across the sea, whose very name and image would take on power all their own, terrifying children in their beds at night. Let that sink in. Thanks for being here, fans. And causing masses, that's right, masses of humanity to part in horror at his very presence. It was a place that provided a platform for him to take his chaos, pun intended, to a whole new level, just at a time when his profile and powers in the West were beginning to wane. It can be argued that just as the Sheik was becoming a major draw in Japan, he was becoming less relevant in North America. In this way, his Japanese exploits helped him extend his career as a major player and added strength and momentum to his international legend. How about that? When the forces of the Empire of Japan surrendered to the Allied powers at the end of the summer of 1945, it marked the beginning of a 7-year occupation by American forces. During that time, Americans brought with them more than an economic support and food. They also brought America in the form of the latest clothing and hairstyles, entertainment churned out by Hollywood Dream Factory, the dulcet tones of Frank Sinatra, Doris Day, and Bing Crosby. There were also American sports like baseball, which became a cultural obsession in Japan that continues to this day. Straddling the fence between entertainment and sport, although the Japanese approach would always favor the latter, was professional wrestling, which was then experiencing a major boom in America thanks to the advent of television. Already enamored of combat sports and kabuki theater, it was an easy sell for Japanese people who phoneticized in its Purosa Ringu, or Purosao for short. Say that 3 times fast. In the early 1950s, Purosao got its patron saint thanks to the rise of Michiru Momota, who had been born Kim Sin-rak in Japanese Korea. I do pretty good with those accents, don't I? Konnichiwa. But changed his name to avoid discrimination after being adopted by a Japanese sumo trainer promoter. Training as a sumo wrestler himself, he took on the name, wait for it, Ricky Dozan, Rugged Mountain Road. I bet you didn't know that for useful and useless tidbits of factual information here on Chaos Corner. And he kept that name when he transitioned into the ranks of Japan's burgeoning pro wrestling industry. In short order, he achieved enormous mainstream celebrity status in that country, helping by the explosion of television that had taken place there a few years after it had in America. He used that status to found the Japanese Wrestling Association, the JWA, and built much of his success on the premise of the national babyface taking on dastardly Western heel invaders. A reflection of some of the bitterest engendered by the end of the war and the prolonged occupation. Wow. And you know what wow spelled backwards is? I know that you know that. From the start, the prosperity of Japanese wrestling business was built in large part of the recruitment of North American talent. Among the first to benefit from this turn of events were Ben and Mike Sharp, a legit brother tag team from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, that parlayed success in Joe Mousewitz's San Francisco territory into a series of trips across the Pacific, as well as major American performers like NWA World Heavyweight Champion Lou Thez. You pencil neck geeks, Classy, Freddie Blassie, and Dick the Destroyer Beyer, all of whom battled Ricky Dozan. That's right. History, that's what you get here. Facts, things that are pertinent. No bullshit. You learn things when you come to Chaos Corner. In encounters that drew Japanese television ratings, figures that dwarf Super Bowl numbers and remain among the highest rated TV programs in world history. In addition to often, but not always, being portrayed as the bad guys, the Caucasian gaijin performers who were sought after by Japanese promoters usually had qualities that were perceived as alien or other to Japanese viewers. Whether it was the bleached blonde hair and bombastic promos of wrestlers like Blassie, the towering physiques of wrestlers like the Sharps, or the unorthodox ring attire of wrestlers like the Masked Destroyer. They brought a color and exoticism with them that made them stand out distinctly from native Japanese competition. That's pretty fast to say that. And they were often viewed as stereotypically American, even if the wrestlers themselves sometimes weren't American. How about that? In several ways, the Sheik was an anomaly in Japanese wrestling. Although he was in reality an American wrestler, he was never presented as such, not even in his own country. So there was an extra layer of otherness to him that fascinated Japanese fans, among whom there were even greater level of suspension of disbelief than their American counterparts. And that's what it's all about, the suspension of disbelief. Also, Japanese pro wrestling often tended to eschew the theatrics and histrionics of the American product, focusing on the sports-like element and a type of performance that strove for reality with the scaredness and sacredness of kayfabe. Kayfabe again, at a very high premium. The technical wrestling style was prized above all else, which made the Sheik a performer who threw fire, stabbed people with sharp objects, and whose main offenses often consisted of biting, gouging, kicking, and punching, stand out all the more. He was already pretty unusual on the American pro wrestling scene, but in the world of Curaçao, he was like someone from another planet or another realm of existence, which only further enhanced his strange appeal. It was not just the Japanese promoters and fans who were willing to overlook his lack of scientific grappling technique in his bizarre rituals and mannerisms. Those were the very things that put him in such high demand. The Sheik was a very unique kind of attraction, explains Japanese wrestling historian Fumi Saito, who grew up as one of those scared kids. It's hard to compare him to anybody. He seemed like the biggest guy, though he wasn't that big or tall. But the crazy look in his eyes, he was very, very special. Just as happened in his native land, the Sheik became known to wrestling fans in Japan first from the magazines. And I've spoken about the magazine eras many times. The magazine era here for you guys. Go back and check it out. It's here on the channel. Amazing, unbelievable, the magazines of the 70s and 80s. They had seen his crimson-covered visage on the covers of publications for years. The most prominent wrestling magazine in Japan, Gong, had started up publication in 1968 at the height of the Sheik's superstardom in the United States. And the Sheik was one of only a few foreign wrestlers to be featured prominently, even without ever having appeared there. Meanwhile, Farhat had been taking dates for years for Hawaii's 50th state big-time wrestling and Los Angeles' Hollywood wrestling. Aloha and mahalo from the G.O.C., both of which were common stopovers for wrestlers going to and from Japan, and both companies that had strong contracts and contacts into the Curaçao business. The LA office in particular had Masaru Charlie Iwamoto, a Hawaiian of Japanese descent who had, in the years after World War II, came to capitalize on anti-Japanese sentiment. taking on the devious persona of Mr. Moto, based on the fictional 1930s secret agent of pulp novels and a series of films starring Peter Lorre. This is history. That's what you get here. This may be before your guys' times, but go out and gals, check this out, research it, do your due diligence. That's why you're here on Chaos Corner. You won't find this kind of history, classic information anywhere else. And I'm proud of that. Mr. Moto, Peter Lorre. I remember those movies like yesterday. I'm not that old, okay? This is a little before my time as well. In addition to wrestling, among Moto's other roles was helping American performers get booked in Japan. And it's believed he may have helped the Sheik make his initial contact with the JWA. But by 1971, let's see, in 71, what was I, 8 or 9 years old in 71? The JWA was in ruins. The great Rikidozan had been murdered in December 1963 by the Yakuza gangster wielding a knife soaked in pig urine. The motive is still not proven to this day, but the killing may have been either due to a nightclub altercation or retaliation for shoot wrestling an opponent in the ring. You want to say fake now? You want me to refer back to Dr. D. David Schultz when it comes to this fucking business? And how people like me who were in the business and take this serious and what it's really all about, let that marinate. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. The company's two top stars in the post-Rikidozan era were in the midst of a power struggle that would soon lead both to leave. One was Shohei Giant Baba, a nearly 7-foot-tall performer, standout pitcher from the Yomiuri Giants who suffered from the same form of gigantism that afflicted Andre the Giant, but had translated it into pro wrestling success after coming under the wing of Rikidozan in 1960 and experiencing breakout stardom in both Japan and the U.S. thanks to his incredible size. The other was Kanji Inoki, the son of an affluent politician and an overachieving high school student who had been living in Brazil when he encountered Rikidozan on a South American tour and came under his tutelage. Antonio Inoki was already a starstruck wrestling fan, so making the trip back to Japan to join Rikidozan's dojo was an easy one, as was taking on the first name Antonio, in honor of his idol, Argentinian legend Antonio Rocca. Originally, let's get back to basics here. Originally, Farhat had been scheduled to make his Japanese wrestling debut in 1971, following his series of appearances in Hawaii and the Los Angeles Coliseum Super Show that summer. But a combination of injury and the disarray within the JWA at the time put those plans on hold. Finally, a year later, with both Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki go on to start their own independent wrestling companies, the Sheik made his initial appearance in the land of the rising sun. A 2-night engagement for the JWA on September 6th and 7th of 1972. Wow. Typically, foreign wrestlers were brought in for extended tours that covered several weeks, in part to make the most of the extensive travel time to get there and back. But as the owner of his own wrestling promotion in the States, Farhat was not eager to be gone for long, and the JWA was willing to accommodate his schedule in order to finally procure the services of the mysterious and horrifying Sheik. The two bookings amounted to a back and forth with the JWA's top remaining drawing card, Seiji Sakaguchi, who had been added to the Sheik's undefeated streak at the Maple Leaf Gardens 3 years earlier. This time, Sakaguchi was a much bigger star and on his home turf, holding the United National Championship, a title shared by the JWA and Hollywood Wrestling. Let that sink in. The United National Championship, and defended on both sides of the Pacific. On the first night before more than 6,000 fans in Denon Coliseum, a tennis venue in Tokyo, the Sheik captured the United National title in a 3-fall match that lasted less than 15 minutes. It was his first night, marvels Saito. He won the title in his very first appearance, and he was already 46 years old. He already had almost 25 years on him. He was kind of an old-looking guy, to quote Saito. But he was a genuinely scary wrestler. The very next night in the Osaka Prefectural Gymnasium, he lost his title back to Sakaguchi in 2 straight falls in just 7.5 minutes of action. Saito was a kid watching on TV from home. In those days, Saito said, titles really mattered. The previous night, Sheik had won in 3 falls. This time in the first fall, Sheik got disqualified in 4 minutes. And 3 minutes into the second fall, he was suplexed in the ring by Sakaguchi, and he pinned the Sheik. 1, 2, 3. Let that marinate. He almost never did that. It's still kind of hard to believe. It's almost surreal. Kind of like being here on Chaos Corner. Clearly, this was a different environment where Sheik didn't have the kind of political power he did in the States. He also had to respect the pecking order as an outsider. A villainous foreign wrestler, he was going to be asked to lose to the popular Japanese hero. Nevertheless, both matches from his initial Japanese appearance were televised, and millions of fans all over the country got to see the Sheik wrestle on their own soil for the first time. But would it be the Sheik's only appearance in the once dominant JWA, which closed its doors permanently in April of '73? Due to dwindling crowds and a lack of domestic star power, both of Sheik's live appearances have only been for half-capacity crowds? And at JWA's place arose All Japan Pro Wrestling. That's right. Founded by the giant Baba and aired on Nippon TV, Japan's oldest and most well-established television station, and New Japan Pro Wrestling, founded by Antonio Inoki and airing on competitor TV Asahi. If I pronounced that right. All my friends over there on the Pac Rim, could you leave a comment? Could you correct me here on my Japanese-style language? You know I speak several languages, so I hope it's coming across here at Chaos Corner. And if it doesn't, fuck it, change the channel. No, wait. Don't change the channel. Remember, this might be a part 2 with the Sheik. The bloodthirsty Sheik in Japan. Both former tag team partners and disciples of Ricky Dozan, meaning Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki, were now locked in what would be a decades-long struggle for national dominance. Of the two, Baba seemed to be the more interested in utilizing major North American stars, possibly due to the much greater success he had experienced in the United States, up to that point having challenged Bruno Sammartino at Madison Square Garden. Main events a decade earlier, and already being a major American draw in many other parts of the country due to his unusual size. Whereas Inoki had been treated more as an undercard attraction using such unflattering monikers as Tokyo Tom. From the beginning, American star power had been a big part of Baba's strategy, and from the beginning of All Japan, the Sheik was high on the list of people he wanted to bring in. Like many wrestler promoters, including the Sheik himself, Baba was very much about using his own promotion as a platform to put himself over in a big way. Still happens in 2024. He immediately created a brand new World Heavyweight title, the Pacific Wrestling Federation Championship, and then proceeded to book himself to go through a series of Gaijin Superstar challenges in a gauntlet tournament that included the likes of Bruno Sammartino, Terry Funk, Bobo Brazil, Pat O'Connor, The Destroyer, Don Leo Jonathan, just to mention a few for you fans out there. Naturally, coming out on the other end without a single loss, thus becoming the first PWF World Heavyweight Champion. After surviving such formidable, you guys know you like it when I get tongue-tied, and you know a Bully Ray from Busted Open Radio, 2-time Hall of Famer, part of the Dudley Boys, said to me back in 05-06 when myself and the Outcast Killers were going for the NWA World Tag Team titles in a series of tables matches. He took me backstage after the first couple of bouts and said, "Give the Guardian of Chaos Big Daddy 5 spots and he'll fuck up 4. I consider that to be a compliment coming from Bully Ray." So if I stumble, rumble, fumble, and mumble here, you guys get it, right? Baba now needed credible challengers, and thus brought the Sheik to All Japan for the first time in April of 1973, which I'm 10 years old at the time, I believe. if my math serves me correctly, 10, 11 years old, for another 2-night mini tour. Their first rowdy main event in Osaka on April 24th was televised as a part of All Japan's first ever Champion Carnival, an annual tournament that would become the longest running anywhere in the world. But Baba versus Sheik was considered such a huge match that it was held separate from the tournament and resulted in Sheik getting counted out of the ring in just 6.5 minutes. Wow. They met again the following night in Tokyo at Nippon University Public Hall, and this time Baba pinned the Sheik in just 8.5 minutes of a one-fall title defense. 2 Japan trips and 2 pinfall losses for the usually unpinnable Sheik. As well, with all those other North American main eventers, he had served his purpose of putting over Baba and his new world title. At the time, business was so hot for big-time wrestling that Farhat finally felt he could definitely leave the country for just a few days, with his other talent drumming up enough business and drawing enough fans to justify missing a few shows. Despite, or perhaps because of the short matches and sometimes chaotic finishes, the fans of Japan were drawn magnetically to him, like moths to flash paper flame. Whenever he was in the building, they just couldn't look away, and the fear in the room was absolutely palpable. Japanese crowds were known for being quite subdued and respectful, especially compared to American ones. But all that went out the window when the Sheik was in town, and he was known to bring out uncharacteristic reactions from the typically docile Japanese audiences. You could hear screams and shouts from men, women, and children alike, and people would scatter on his path like their lives depended on it. Kind of like in the future in Japan when Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen and the Road Warriors invaded Japan. Sheik was there first. Talk about history. Sometimes the opposite would occur, owing to a Japanese superstition which dictates that touching something that frightens you will bring good luck. And so the Sheik would sometimes find himself mobbed with Japanese fans rushing him, quickly tapping him on the arm or the back, and then running away. This famously happened once while Sheik was trying to hide by the curtain one night to check out the crowd and was spotted by a horde of spectators, the old curtain jerker, who promptly converged on his location and put him on the run. A decided reversal of what he was typically supposed to do. He told me about having to fight through the crowd. He recalls Tommy Dreamer, a longtime colleague and confidant of the Sheik's nephew, Terry Sabu Brunk, would become a trusted family friend. It was part of their culture and other wrestlers to confirm this. It would be an honor if he hit them, because if he just said, "out of my way," then it would be like it wasn't real, so he would show them that it was real. He carried weapons on hands like homemade sieves in his boots, because people would try to come after him, and there were sometimes, a lot of times, all the time, riots. Who was king of the riots? Yours truly, 25 years behind the walls. Read the Mitt. Read the community page. Read the subscriptions underneath my name on this fucking channel. Farhat waited 1.5 years before coming back to Japan, and this time it would controversially work out a deal with Baba's rival, Inoki, to come in for a 2-week tour with New Japan, his first time working for the other group. For a couple of reasons, it would turn out to be his only one. With his promotional war with Dick the Bruiser behind him, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to return to Japan safely without having to worry about dividing his attention. What he didn't realize was that he was about to face his third and final coup attempt. At this time, the parties involved were waiting for him to leave the country in order to make their move. The week of November 3rd, 1974, after overseeing a Sunday night show at the Maple Leaf Gardens that saw him defeat Tiger Jeet Singh in a steel cage main event, Farhat came home to Williamstown, then hopped on a plane for New Japan tour that was set to begin on Friday, November 8th. You like that I have the dates here. Thank you, Brian Solomon. With a match against Seiji Sakaguchi at the intimate Korakuen Hall in Tokyo's Bunkyo Ward. Bunkyo. Say that. Immediately after he left the U.S., a secret cabal of big-time wrestling personnel, including Killer Tim Brooks and Tony Murillo, then locked in a money feud for the company Ben Justice, who was a red hot after turning heel on his longtime tag team partner, the Stomper, ring announcer and TV commentator Terry Sullivan, and most notably Farhat's own booker and right-hand man, Jack Kane. He spearheaded the whole maneuver, officially left the Farhat promotion, and started running shows under their own company banner, International Wrestling. They managed to attract several more of Farhat's people, even including photographer and front office employee Dan Berzinski. Geek, dweeb, mouth breather, nerd. This was a big blow at the time, says Lou Klein, trainer of Big Jim Lancaster. Do your research, fans. I know you don't know a lot of these names, but this is pure history here. Why did they jump ship, Lancaster asked. It was my understanding that he would hold guys down, but the payoffs were the number one thing. If the houses were good, some of the top guys would do okay. I was a Klein's gym guy, brand new in the business. I worked a sellout that drew $62,000, and I got paid $50. It was that kind of stuff. A lot of the guys grew weary of having those bad payoffs. Plus, they could never get over. It's about going over. It's not about, well, let me rephrase that. It's not about going over. It's about getting over. He would never allow another heel to get as hot as he was. It was a shocking betrayal and an indicator of Farhat's difficulty at times and inspiring loyalty to those who worked for him. Blindsided by the defections, who wouldn't be? Instead of 2 weeks he had booked for, he stayed for only one, highlighted by an infamous lumberjack match with Inoki that ended in forfeiture when the Sheik left the ring and refused to return. By Friday, November 15th, Farhat was back in Michigan to try to get his house in order. Inoki is believed to have been less than enthused by the situation, compounded by the fact that apparently Farhat was in breach of the exclusive agreement he had made with Baba's All Japan. Not only did Farhat never work for Inoki again, but the international wrestling debacle made him so afraid of leaving the country that he didn't return to Japan for 3 years. When he finally did return on December 1977, it would be the first proper 2-week tour as part of All Japan's original Open Tag Team League, or Open Tag League, a round-robin tag team tournament that drew on talent from around the world and became a major annual tradition that continues to this day. It would also be the Sheik's most legendary Japanese tour, cementing his iconic status in that country. A status that still held water some 15 years later when he returned there in the twilight of his career. Much had changed since Farhat's last appearance to Japan. His company, Worldwide Sports, was in a tailspin. Attendance and TV ratings for big-time wrestling were drying up, and revenue had slowed significantly from the salad days of the early 70s. Let me say that again. Had slowed significantly from the salad days of the early 70s. I hope you're watching this on video. Even though it's great on audio, the video impact is unbelievable, is it not? Wow. In short, Farhat was in greater need of cash to help keep his company afloat, and he needed Japan and its hefty paydays for American stars more than ever. His partner in the tag team tournament would be an individual who would figure prominently in the second half of the Sheik's career, someone whose ferocity, unpredictability, and sheer violence in the ring were arguably rivaled by only the Sheik himself, from who he had borrowed quite liberally, truth be told, Larry Shreve, a.k.a. Abdullah the Butcher, was a dirt-poor kid from Windsor, Ontario, the son of a Blackfoot Native American father and an African-American mother who had seen the Sheik during his early years wrestling for promoters like Harry Light and Bert Ruby, and later Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle in the original big-time wrestling, a master of karate and judo from a young age. He was recruited by Montreal wrestling promoter Jack Britton, a former assistant to Light. In 1958, at the age of 17, after touring with a few different gimmicks, Shreve first came to work for the Sheik in big-time wrestling in 1965. An opening match with a guy named Zealous Amera, Just 2 years later, while working for Rod Fenton in British Columbia territory, he took on a persona that would take him to wrestling immortality over the next 40 years. Abdullah the Butcher, the madman from the Sudan, wearing the headscarf, pointed boots, refusing to speak on promos, and utilizing an ultraviolet and almost completely wrestling hold-free style that included assaulting his opponents with sharp objects and bleeding profusely. Shreve made it obvious where his inspiration had come from. Even if he didn't incorporate martial arts elements like the wearing of judo pants and the issue of hand thrust that would change things up a bit by incorporating the martial arts, it still was a subtle movement to the Sheik. By the time they teamed together in Japan for the first time, the Sheik and Abdullah the Butcher were already well acquainted. The Butcher had been working big-time wrestling undercards as early as 1969 and was given a World Tag Team title reign with Killer Tim Brooks in 1974 and a 2-month U.S. title reign in 1975. Later that year, seeing the obvious potential in such a crazed pairing, the Sheik had elevated him to the latest in an ongoing string of monster heel tag team partners for himself. In addition to the big-time circuit, they had been teaming as well and opposing each other all over North America in places like Montreal, Toronto, Georgia Championship Wrestling, Nick Goulas's Tennessee and Alabama territory, and in Texas on both the Dallas and Amarillo circuits. They made a formidable duo, whether as partners or opponents, with the younger and somewhat sprier Abdullah. Who thought that would ever be said about Abdullah the Butcher, younger and sprier? Only further accentuating the Sheik's already intense and demonic aura. I think Abby would try to be at a greater level than the Sheik, and he couldn't quite make it, explains Terry Funk, who would play an integral part in that 1977 All Japan tour as well. Now, this is to quote Terry Funk again. But Abby was one hell of a heel, too. I'm not underselling him either. Two of the greatest heels in the country at that time. The tour consisted of a grueling 13 matches over 14 days in 12 different cities, including Yokohama, Osaka, Hiroshima, and Nagoya, with opening and closing matches in Tokyo. Aside from the tag team tournament, the Sheik was matched in a singles encounter against several notable performers from all over the world. They included distinguished British catch wrestler Billy Robinson, who actually had his eye pulled out and thrown through a plate glass window in a restaurant in Hawaii by the High Paramount Chief Peter Maivia. A proponent of the feared Wigan style and a product of Billy Riley's infamous Snake Pit training school, who was considered one of the most dangerous legitimate grapplers in the world. Talking about Billy Robinson. Dory Funk Jr., who along with his brother Terry had become enormously popular among Japanese fans who were enthralled by American performers who played the cowboy role. Masao Kimura, on loan from All Japan, competitor of International Wrestling Alliance, where he was in the midst of a third reign as the IWA World Heavyweight Champion, a Baba protege, Tommy Jumbo Saruta, who had represented Japan in the Munich Summer Olympics 5 years prior, and of course, All Japan Kingpin giant Baba himself. The fact that the Sheik lost each of those matches by either disqualification or countout in less than 10 minutes speaks volumes about their chaotic nature, as well as about the nature of the Sheik as a performer. In the late 70s, still the Japanese couldn't get enough of it. But the meat of the tour was in the 13-day open tag team tournament, tag league tournament itself. The Sheik and Abdullah the Butcher mowed through 7 different teams, scoring 6 victories and 1 draw, leading to a final confrontation with the team of Dory and Terry Funk on December 15th before 12,000 fans in Tokyo Sumo Hall. By that point in their careers, both of the Funk brothers had enjoyed reigns as NWA World Champion, with Terry having just passed the title to Harley Race in a classic encounter some 10 months prior at the Maple Leaf Gardens. I remember it like yesterday. The Funks also knew Farhat very well, having practically grown up around him all through the years he had spent working with their father, Dory Funk Sr., who had died tragically 4 years earlier after suffering a heart attack while demonstrating a wrestling hold on a friend. That's what you learn here on Chaos Corner. You learn things. Terry and Dory Jr. were now in charge of the Amarillo territory their father had left behind, which was suffering a similar slow death that was happening to Farhat's territory. The explosion of bloodshed and unhinged violence produced by these four men when they clashed on those final nights in Tokyo is evidence that you don't necessarily need wrestling holds and scientific technique to put together a hellaciously thrilling wrestling match. It was like anything the Japanese audience was used to seeing. And while watching the match, you can sense the horror and panic in the crowd. The madness begins from the outset with the Funks blindsiding the Sheik before he even gets a chance to go into his pre-match ritual, drawing first blood quite literally from their insane opponents, the Sheik and the Butcher. What follows is 15 tense minutes of biting, kicking, choking, and rending of flesh. Midway through, Sheik and Abdullah began mercilessly jabbing Terry's right arm with Abby's trademark fork. Terry does oblige with a rare arm blade job, a la Dusty Rhodes. As the referee conveniently misses the relentless transgressions, finally the fork is spotted and removed, and Dory finally gets the tag from his beleaguered brother, storming the ring with righteous rage and the addition and adulation of the fans. As Terry's bleeding arm is bandaged at ringside, the Sheik brandishes a weapon of choice, the pencil against Dory. When Dory gets his own hands on the implement, the crowd comes unhinged and unglued. A common babyface spot in America, but one that was brand new to the virgin Japanese crowd. In the end, the Sheik's pencil chicanery is spotted by the selectively cited ref, who calls for the disqualification, giving the match and the Open Tag League trophy to the Funk Brothers. But the havoc doesn't end there, as Sheik assaults the ref and a wild pull-apart ensues when the ring is filled by young boys, greenhorn wrestlers who customly lurk around ringside area to assist in any way needed. Wow. All right, fans, that is part one here of the Sheik in Japan, the original bloodthirsty Sheik in Japan. I will be right back. We're mere moments away from part two here on Story Time with the Guardian of Chaos on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. So come on back. You're not going to want to miss this. We're 42 minutes in. Let's keep it under an hour. 2 parts of the original Sheik in Japan. I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is. Don't you dare miss it. I'm coming right back.